I didn't know what to expect when I accepted the ranger position at Blackwood National Park. The job interview had gone well. My experience hiking these mountains since I was a kid had impressed the hiring committee. They'd nodded along as I talked about my familiarity with the trails, the local wildlife, and how I'd always dreamed of protecting this place. What they hadn't mentioned was Zachary Casey. I'd been on the job less than a week when Zachary cornered me in the equipment shed. I was checking inventory, making sure all the radios were charged for the next day's shift, when his tall frame blocked the doorway. The late afternoon light cast him in silhouette. "Got a minute, Brewer?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel underfoot. "Sure thing," I said, setting down my clipboard. Zachary stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He looked around as if making sure we were alone, which struck me as odd. The shed wasn't exactly a high-traffic area. "Need to tell you something important," he said, leaning against a shelf of emergency supplies. "Something they don't put in the training manuals." I waited, expecting some insider tip about dealing with lost hikers or handling aggressive wildlife. "Never, and I mean never, investigate strange sounds after dark in this park," he said, his blue eyes locked on mine. "Radio it in, mark it on your report, but wait till morning." I tried not to smile. This had to be some kind of initiation ritual, a way to mess with the new guy. "What kind of sounds?" I asked, playing along. "Screams, voices calling for help, crashes that don't make sense." He ticked them off on his weathered fingers. "You hear any of that? You stay put. You understand?" I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Got it." "I'm serious, Clifford," he added, using my first name for emphasis. 28 years I've worked these woods, seen rangers come and go. The ones who listen to me, they stick around. "And the ones who don't?" I asked, still thinking this was some elaborate joke. "They don't," he said simply. Then he turned and walked out, leaving me alone with the equipment and my thoughts. Later that night I laughed about it with my girlfriend over the phone. "The old-timer tried to scare me with ghost stories today," I told her. "Probably does it to all the new rangers." "Maybe he's trying to keep you safe," she suggested. "From what?" "I've hiked every trail in this park. There's nothing out there I can't handle." I really believed that back then. I'd grown up in these mountains, spent weekends camping with my dad, and later explored on my own. I knew the terrain, could read the weather, and had all the training I needed to handle emergencies. Zachary's warning seemed like superstition from another era, something a man his age might believe after too many years alone in the wilderness. I was wrong. The first time I heard one of the sounds Zachary had warned me about was 3 months into the job. I was doing a night patrol along the eastern boundary, checking for illegal campers. The moon was nearly full, lighting the trail enough that I barely needed my flashlight. Then I heard it. A woman's voice, distant but clear, calling for help. My first instinct was to head toward it. That's what rangers do. We help people in trouble. My hand was already reaching for my flashlight when Zachary's warning popped into my head. I stood there, frozen in indecision. The voice called again, more desperate this time. It seemed to be coming from Miners Ridge, maybe half a mile away. I knew that area well. Old mining paths that tourists sometimes explored despite the warning signs. "This is stupid," I muttered to myself. "Someone could be hurt." But I remembered the look in Zachary's eyes. He hadn't been joking. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Brewer. I'm hearing calls for help near Miners Ridge. Over." "Copy that, Brewer. Any visual?" "Over." "Negative. Too dark to see anything from my position. Request permission to investigate." There was a pause before dispatch responded. "Negative, Brewer. Mark your location and continue your patrol. We'll send a team at first light." Over. I was surprised by the response, but relieved to have the decision taken out of my hands. "Copy that. Marking location now. Over and out." The next morning, I joined the search team. We combed Miners Ridge for hours and found nothing. No lost hikers, no signs of disturbance, not even footprints besides our own. I told myself it must have been the wind playing tricks, or maybe an animal sound I'd misinterpreted. Over the next 2 years, I heard those sounds 5 more times. Twice it was screams. Not animal sounds, but distinctly human. Once it was what sounded like someone calling my name, which sent chills down my spine. Another time it was a massive crash, like a tree falling, except there was no storm and the forest floor showed no evidence of any fallen trees the next day. Each time, I followed protocol. I radioed in, marked my location, and waited until morning to search. And each time, we found nothing. My colleagues never talked about these incidents afterward. They'd file their reports, shrug their shoulders, and move on. I started to wonder if they'd all gotten the same warning from Zachary that I had. The lack of evidence reinforced my original suspicion that Zachary was just being superstitious. Maybe the old ranger had heard similar sounds during his career and created some personal mythology around them. The rational explanation was that sound travels strangely in mountain valleys, especially at night. What sounded like a human scream could easily be a mountain lion. What sounded like my name could be the wind whistling through rock formations. That's what I told myself anyway. But I still never investigated those sounds at night. Call it respect for a veteran ranger or just playing it safe. I'd note the location, wait for daylight, and then search thoroughly. The fact that I never found anything unusual during these searches only strengthened my belief that there was nothing to Zachary's warning. One evening, I ran into him at the station as our shifts crossed over. He was hanging up his hat, about to head home, when he noticed me gearing up for night patrol. "Eastern boundary tonight?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, checking the campgrounds and making sure no one's wandered off trail." He studied my face for a moment. "You've heard them by now, haven't you? The sounds?" I hesitated before answering. "Yeah, a few times." And nothing," I said with a shrug. "I follow protocol. Wait till morning. We never find anything." A small smile formed on his face. "Good. You're smarter than you look." I laughed. "Or maybe there's just nothing out there, Zachary." His smile faded. "Keep believing that if it helps you sleep. Just don't break protocol." I wanted to press him further, to ask what he thought was really out there, but he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. "Stay safe tonight, Brewer," he called over his shoulder. "Always do," I replied. As I drove to my starting point that night, I thought about Zachary and his warning. Part of me still believed he was just being superstitious. Another part wondered if there was something more to it, something the veteran ranger had experienced that he couldn't or wouldn't explain. Either way, I felt confident in my abilities. I knew these mountains, knew this forest. If there was anything dangerous out there, I was trained to handle it. And if the mysterious sounds were just tricks of nature, well, no harm in being cautious. I parked my truck at the trailhead and checked my equipment one last time before heading into the darkening forest. The sun had just set, painting the sky in fading oranges and purples. Soon it would be fully dark, with only my flashlight and the stars above to guide me. As I stepped onto the trail, I felt that familiar mix of respect and comfort that these woods always gave me. This was my place, had been since childhood. Whatever strange sounds might echo through the night, I was at home here. But I still kept my radio closed just in case. The scream cut through the humid August night, high-pitched and unmistakably human. I froze mid-step on the trail, my flashlight beam wobbling as I listened for it to come again. 3 years into my ranger position at Blackwood, I knew every inch of this northern section. But tonight, something felt different about these familiar woods. There it was again. A woman's voice, crying out from the direction of Willow Creek, maybe half a mile northeast of my position. I checked my watch, 1:17 in the morning. The full weight of Zachary's warning pressed against my thoughts. Don't investigate strange sounds after dark. Radio it in. Mark it on your report. Wait until morning. But this didn't sound like the other screams I'd heard over the years. Those had been strange, almost theatrical. Like something trying to sound human but not quite getting it right. This had a raw, panicked edge that made my skin prickle. I unclipped my radio, thumb hovering over the call button. Protocol was clear. I'd followed it for 3 years without question. Hello? Is anyone there? The voice called again, weaker this time. My hand dropped from the radio. What if someone was actually hurt out there? What if they needed immediate help? I couldn't live with myself if I left someone to suffer all night when I was this close. This is different, I muttered to myself, trying to justify breaking the rule that had been drilled into me since day one. This isn't one of those sounds. This is real. I tightened my grip on my flashlight and started moving toward Willow Creek, pushing through the dense undergrowth where the trail ended. The humid air clung to my skin as I hiked, making my uniform stick uncomfortably to my back. My boots sank slightly into the soft ground with each step. The forest seemed to close in around me as I moved deeper into it. Normally teeming with night sounds, crickets, frogs, the occasional owl, the woods had gone strangely quiet. I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease as I pushed forward, focusing instead on the creek I could now hear gurgling ahead. "Hello?" I called out, sweeping my flashlight across the tree line. "Forest Service. Is anyone there?" No response came. I pressed on until I reached the bank of Willow Creek. The water flowed faster than usual, swollen from the summer rains we'd had earlier in the week. My light caught something by the water's edge. A figure huddled on a flat rock beside the creek. I approached cautiously, keeping my flashlight trained on the form that slowly resolved into a young woman. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, clothes torn and caked with mud. "Miss, are you okay?" I asked, keeping my voice steady and professional despite the relief washing over me. This was a real person, not some unexplained phenomenon. I'd made the right call. She looked up at me, her face pale in the harsh beam of my flashlight. I lowered it slightly to avoid blinding her. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I thought no one would find me." I crouched down a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her. "I'm Ranger Brewer with the Forest Service. Are you injured?" She shook her head, just scared and lost. "My name's Tammy. Tammy Fitzgerald." "What happened, Tammy?" I asked, looking her over for any signs of injury she might not be reporting. "I was hiking with friends," she said, pushing wet strands of brown hair from her face. "We were trying to reach the lookout point before sunset, but I slipped at the creek crossing. The current was stronger than it looked. It pulled me downstream, away from my group." She gestured vaguely upstream. "I've been trying to find my way back, but it got dark so fast." I nodded, though something about her story didn't sit right with me. The creek was running high, but not enough to sweep away an adult, and the lookout point was on the southern trail system, miles from here. No hiking group should have been anywhere near this section of the park. "How many people were in your group?" I asked. "4, including me." She hugged her knees tighter. "Do you think they're looking for me?" "I'm sure they are," I said automatically, though I hadn't received any reports of missing hikers. "When exactly did you get separated?" "This afternoon," she said after a slight pause. "Around 4, I think." That made even less sense. If she'd been missing since 4 in the afternoon, her friends would have reported it by now. We would have had search teams out before dark. I noticed she was shivering despite the warm night. The temperature couldn't have dropped below 75 degrees, yet she trembled as if caught in a winter storm. "Are you cold?" I asked. "Yes," she said simply, her teeth almost chattering. The water was so cold. But it wasn't. Willow Creek ran warm this time of year, especially after days of summer heat. "Let me help you up," I said, extending my hand. "I'll take you back to the ranger station. We can call search and rescue to find your friends and get you some dry clothes." She looked at my outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it. Her fingers felt like ice against my skin, and I nearly pulled back from the unexpected chill. "Thank you," she said as I helped her to her feet. She was unsteady, leaning against me more than I expected. "Can you walk okay?" I asked. She nodded. "Just tired." I guided her away from the creek and back toward the trail, my flashlight cutting a path through the darkness. The strange silence of the forest persisted, with none of the usual night sounds returning. No frogs, no insects, nothing but our footsteps and breathing. "The station isn't far," I told her, though my mind was racing with questions. Why was she so cold on a warm night? How had she ended up in this remote section of the park? Why hadn't her friends reported her missing? But I kept these thoughts to myself as we walked, deciding that getting her to safety took priority over satisfying my curiosity. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about Tammy Fitzgerald and her story wasn't adding up. I led Tammy along the trail toward the ranger station. The path was familiar, a route I'd walked hundreds of times during my 2 years at Blackwood. The packed dirt should have taken us straight to the station in about half an hour, plenty of time to get her somewhere warm and figure out what was really going on with her story. "The station has dry clothes and a first aid kit," I said, glancing back to make sure she was keeping up. "We can call search and rescue from there to look for your friends." Tammy nodded but said nothing. She walked a few steps behind me, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm night. The beam of my flashlight swept across the path ahead, catching the occasional reflection of animal eyes watching from the underbrush. I frowned, suddenly aware of something odd. Those reflective eyes had vanished. In fact, all the normal forest sounds had disappeared. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves from small creatures moving through the underbrush, no distant owl calls. Just silence. Our footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the quiet. Each snap of a twig under our boots echoed like a gunshot. "Do you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Tammy's voice was flat. "Nothing. That's what's weird. The forest is too quiet." She didn't respond. I turned back to look at her, the flashlight beam catching her pale face. Her expression remained blank, almost disinterested. "So, you said you were hiking with friends?" I asked, trying to get her talking. "What are their names? We'll need to report them missing." "Just some people from school." "Which school is that?" She paused for several seconds. "Western State." I knew Western State was over 100 miles away. "That's a long drive to come hiking. You must have left pretty early this morning." "We stayed at a hotel last night." "Which one?" Another long pause. "The one by the highway." Her answers were getting vaguer, not more specific. I tried a different approach. "You mentioned trying to reach the lookout point. Which one were you heading for? Eagle Peak or Miners Ridge?" "The one with the view," she said. I stopped asking questions for a while and focused on the trail. We'd been walking for about 20 minutes now. The junction to the ranger station should be coming up any second, a wooden sign marking the split in the trail. I shined my flashlight ahead, expecting to see it, but the path just continued straight into the trees. That couldn't be right. I'd walked this route so many times I could practically do it blindfolded. The junction was unmistakable, a large wooden sign with carved arrows pointing to Ranger Station and East Trail. I kept walking, thinking maybe I'd misjudged the distance. After another 5 minutes, there was still no sign of the junction. "We need to stop for a minute," I said, coming to a halt. Tammy stopped too, still hugging herself, watching me with those dark eyes. I pulled out my GPS unit from my belt. It was standard issue park equipment, reliable and accurate. I turned it on and waited for it to connect to the satellites. When the screen lit up, I stared at it in disbelief. Instead of showing our position on the trail network, it displayed our location as a blank area. No trails, no landmarks, nothing. Just empty terrain. This doesn't make any sense, I muttered. I'd hiked these woods for over 15 years, first as a kid with my dad and then professionally as a ranger. I knew every trail, creek, and ridge in Blackwood. Yet according to the GPS, we were in unmapped territory. I looked around, trying to orient myself using the stars, but the tree canopy was too thick to see the night sky clearly. "Is something wrong?" Tammy asked, her voice still oddly calm. "We should have reached the junction by now, and my GPS isn't showing any trails." I tried not to let my growing unease show in my voice. "Let me call for some help." I unclipped my radio from my belt. "This is Ranger Brewer calling station. Over." Static crackled from the speaker. I tried again. "This is Brewer calling the station. Anyone copy? Over." More static, then a voice broke through. "Brewer? This is Trevor. What's up? Over." Relief washed over me at hearing Trevor's voice. Trevor Graves was one of the more experienced rangers, and we'd worked together on numerous occasions. "Trevor, I've got a lost hiker with me. We're trying to make it back to the station, but I think we're off trail. GPS isn't showing any mapped trails where we are. Over." "Where did you find the hiker?" Over. "Near Willow Creek in the northern section. We've been walking south for about 25 minutes. Should have hit the main junction by now. Over." There was a pause before Trevor responded. "That's weird. You should definitely have reached it. Stay put. I'll drive out to meet you. Can you fire a flare so I can get your position?" Over. "Negative on the flare. Don't want to risk a fire in these conditions. But if you head to the northern trailhead and follow the main path, we should be somewhere along it. Over." "Copy that. I'm heading out now. Keep your radio on. Over." "Thanks, Trevor. We'll..." A sudden scream cut through the radio. Trevor's voice filled with raw terror. It was so loud and unexpected that I nearly dropped the radio. Then, abrupt silence. "Trevor? Trevor, do you copy?" Over. I waited, heart pounding in my chest. No response. "Trevor, this is Brewer. Do you copy? Over." I spoke more urgently now, nothing but static. "Trevor, come in. Are you there? Over." The radio remained silent except for the soft hiss of static. I tried switching channels, thinking maybe he'd changed frequencies for some reason, but got the same result on every channel. "What was that?" Tammy asked, still sounding remarkably calm despite the blood-curdling scream we'd just heard. "I don't know," I said, trying the radio again. "Trevor, this is Brewer. Please respond. Over." The silence from the radio felt heavy and ominous. Trevor had screamed. There was no mistaking that sound. And then nothing. Something had happened to him, something bad enough to make an experienced ranger cry out in terror. I clipped the radio back to my belt, keeping the volume up so I'd hear if Trevor called back. The forest around us remained unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. "We need to keep moving," I said, more to myself than to Tammy. "We need to find the trail junction." I looked at her, standing there in her torn clothes, seemingly unbothered by Trevor's scream or our increasingly strange situation. Her calmness was starting to feel less reassuring and more disturbing. "Let's go," I said, turning back to the trail and raising my flashlight. "Stay close behind me." I started to notice something wasn't right. We'd been walking for at least 40 minutes on what should have been a straight path back to the ranger station, but the trees around us looked oddly familiar. "Wait," I said, stopping abruptly and raising my flashlight. The beam caught the distinctive shape of a fallen log with a mushroom cluster growing from its center. "We've passed this before." Tammy stopped a few paces behind me, her arms still wrapped around herself despite the warm night air. She didn't respond, just watched me with those unnervingly calm eyes. This log. We walked past it about 15 minutes ago. I moved my flashlight to illuminate a rock formation just beyond the log. 3 boulders stacked against each other like a natural sculpture. And those rocks, too. I turned to look at Tammy, expecting her to share my confusion or concern. Her face remained blank, almost expectant. "Don't you think that's weird? We should have reached the junction by now, but we're going in circles somehow." She shrugged slightly. "Maybe we took a wrong turn." "There haven't been any turns. We've been on a straight path." I pulled out my GPS unit again, which still showed nothing but blank terrain. "This doesn't make sense." I looked up at the canopy above us. The trees blocked any view of stars that might help with navigation. My training kicked in. When lost, stay put and wait for rescue. But Trevor had screamed over the radio, and no one else knew where we were. "Let's keep going," I said, more to myself than to Tammy. We continued walking, my flashlight leading the way. The beam seemed weaker now, the darkness around us thicker somehow, as if it were physically pressing in against the light. I tapped the flashlight against my palm a few times, but the beam continued to dim. 10 minutes later, I spotted the same fallen log and rock formation again. "This isn't possible," I muttered, stopping in my tracks. I looked back at Tammy. "We're walking in circles." She said nothing, just watched me with that same eerie calmness. She hadn't mentioned our repetitive surroundings once. "Don't you see it?" I asked, gesturing at the log. "This is the third time we've passed this exact spot." "Maybe we should try a different direction," she suggested, her voice flat. I nodded, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Yeah, let's try going this way." I pointed to what looked like a gap in the trees to our right, away from the path we'd been following. We pushed through the underbrush, branches catching on my uniform. The forest seemed to grow denser the further we went, the spaces between trees narrowing. My flashlight beam had weakened to a sickly yellow glow that barely illuminated a few feet ahead. "This isn't right," I said after what felt like hours of walking. My watch showed we'd been moving for almost 3 hours since I'd found Tammy by the creek. None of this is right. The batteries in my flashlight were new. They shouldn't be dying this quickly. I hit it against my palm again, harder this time, and the beam flickered before stabilizing slightly. As I raised the light, something caught my eye through a gap in the trees ahead. A structure. A building. "There's something up ahead," I said, quickening my pace. As we got closer, I could make out more details. Green paint. A wooden sign. The familiar shape of a ranger station. Identical to the one where I worked on the other side of the park. I stopped, staring at it. This isn't possible. The station stood in a small clearing looking exactly like my workplace, down to the arrangement of windows and the slight tilt of the wooden sign. But there was no ranger station in this part of Blackwood. I knew the park maps by heart after 2 years of service. This building shouldn't exist. Yet there it stood, solid and real in the beam of my failing flashlight. "Wait here," I told Tammy as we approached the building. "I'm going to check it out." She nodded and stopped at the edge of the clearing while I moved toward the structure. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I climbed onto the porch. The windows were dark, no light visible inside. I tried the door handle, expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily in my hand. The door swung open with a long, low creak. I swept my flashlight across the interior and froze. Dark stains covered the floor and walls. Large splashes and smears of what looked horribly like dried blood. Papers were scattered across the floor around an overturned desk. Chairs lay on their sides, and a filing cabinet had been pulled over, its contents spilled across the room. I stepped inside carefully, the floorboards groaning beneath me. The air smelled stale and metallic. "Hello?" I called out, though I felt certain the place was empty. My voice echoed strangely in the silent room. I moved toward the desk, my boots crunching on broken glass and scattered papers. With the toe of my boot, I flipped over some of the papers. Incident reports, duty rosters, weather logs, official park documents, just like the ones at my station. Something caught my eye among the debris. a rectangular piece of paper face down on the floor. I knelt and picked it up, turning it over. It was a photograph showing a female ranger standing in front of Blackwood's main entrance sign. She wore the same uniform I did, her brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, a professional smile on her face. She looked to be in her late 20s, with bright eyes that seemed to stare directly at me. I turned the photo over. On the back, someone had written a message in shaky handwriting. "The forest takes what it wants. Amelia Dennis never left. Neither will you." Below the message was a date from 7 years ago. I stared at the writing, a cold weight settling in my stomach. 7 years ago, before my time at Blackwood. I'd never heard the name Amelia Dennis before. Yet here was evidence she had been a ranger just like me. I looked back at the dark stains on the floor and walls, the overturned furniture, the signs of struggle or violence that had occurred in this impossible ranger station. The forest takes what it wants. My hands shook as I held the photograph, the weak beam of my flashlight barely illuminating the woman's face. I needed to show this to someone. I needed to understand what was happening. I turned and hurried back toward the door, the photograph clutched tightly in my hand. I rushed outside, the photograph clutched tight in my hand, ready to show Tammy what I'd found. "Tammy?" I called out, stepping off the porch of the impossible ranger station. The clearing where I'd left her stood empty. I moved to the exact spot where she'd been standing just minutes ago, sweeping my flashlight across the ground and surrounding trees. "Tammy!" I called again, louder this time. My voice bounced back at me, the echo sounding wrong, too hollow, lasting too long. The forest swallowed my words and sent them back distorted. I waited for a response, but only that unnatural silence pressed in around me. I crouched down, running my hand over the earth where she should have left footprints. The soil was soft enough that her boots would have made impressions, but the ground remained unmarked. Even my own tracks seemed to fade a few yards back, as if the forest floor was erasing our presence. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, standing up and turning in a slow circle. I kept the failing flashlight beam moving, searching for any sign of her. A scrap of clothing caught on a branch, trampled vegetation, anything. But there was nothing to suggest Tammy Fitzgerald had ever been there with me. Nothing to prove she'd ever existed at all. I checked my watch. Barely 15 minutes had passed since I'd entered the ranger station. She couldn't have gone far, not in her condition, not in this terrain. "Tammy!" I shouted one more time, cupping my hands around my mouth. The echo came back wrong again, almost like someone mocking my call rather than a true reflection of sound. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I expanded my search, moving in widening circles around the clearing, careful not to lose sight of the station. The photograph felt heavy in my pocket, its message burning in my mind. The forest takes what it wants. Had it taken Tammy, too? After 10 minutes of searching, I found nothing. No broken twigs, no disturbed undergrowth, no sign anyone besides me had been here. It was as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. I pulled out my radio, trying different channels, but got only static. The GPS unit still showed blank terrain. I was considering my next move when I heard it. Crashing sounds coming from the east, something large moving through the underbrush without any attempt at stealth. I swung my flashlight toward the noise, hand moving to the pepper spray on my belt. The crashing grew louder, branches snapping, leaves rustling. "Who's there?" I called out, taking a step back. The underbrush parted and a figure stumbled into the clearing. The weak beam of my flashlight revealed a Park Service uniform, torn and dirty. Blood gleamed wetly on exposed skin. "Trevor?" I said, recognizing my colleague despite his condition. Trevor Graves lurched forward, his movements uncoordinated. Deep scratches marked his face and arms, still bleeding freely. His uniform hung in tatters as if he'd been dragged through thorns. But most disturbing were his eyes, unfocused, dilated, looking through me rather than at me. "Trevor, what happened to you?" I asked, moving toward him. He closed the distance between us with surprising speed, grabbing my shoulders with both hands. His grip was painfully tight, fingers digging in like claws. "It's a desolate place, Clifford," he said, his voice hoarse. "The forest leads you where it wants you to go. It's a desolate place." His eyes rolled wildly, never quite focusing on me. Blood from a cut on his forehead trickled down his temple. "Trevor, you need to calm down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're hurt. We need to get you out of here." "It's a desolate place," he repeated, shaking me slightly. "The forest leads you where it wants you to go. It's a desolate place." I gently but firmly removed his hands from my shoulders. "I know, Trevor. I understand. But we need to move now, okay? We need to get back to the trail." He nodded vaguely, still repeating the same phrases. I put my arm around his shoulders, noting how he flinched at the contact, and began guiding him away from the ranger station. I cast one last look at the building, wondering if I should go back for anything else, but decided Trevor's condition was more urgent. "We're going to walk this way," I told him, pointing with my flashlight. "Just stay with me." Trevor stumbled alongside me, occasionally mumbling his mantra, "It's a desolate place. The forest leads you where it wants you to go." I checked the GPS again, hoping for some miracle, but the screen still showed unmapped territory. With no stars visible through the thick canopy and no landmarks I recognized, I had to make a decision. "Trevor, I'm going to fire a flare," I told him, though I wasn't sure he understood. "The fire risk is worth it now. We need to find our way out." I took a flare from my belt, aimed it through a gap in the trees, and fired. The red light arced up, briefly illuminating the forest in a crimson glow before disappearing above the canopy. I waited, watching for any sign it had been seen. Nothing changed, but the action gave me a moment to think. If we were truly lost in some impossible space, maybe conventional navigation wouldn't work. But if this was still Blackwood, still the real world, then there had to be a way out. "We're going to keep moving," I told Trevor. "Just stay close." I chose a direction that felt right, pure instinct, and started walking, keeping Trevor beside me. His condition worried me. The bleeding hadn't stopped, and his delirious state suggested shock or worse. We walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes according to my watch. Trevor's strength was failing, his steps becoming more unsteady. I fired another flare, and this time, through the trees ahead, I caught a glimpse of something familiar. The silhouette of Lookout Ridge, a landmark I knew well. "We're getting closer," I told Trevor, who nodded vacantly. With renewed determination, I guided us toward the ridge. Gradually, the forest began to feel right again. The trees thinned out. The path beneath our feet became more defined, and when I checked the GPS, faint outlines of mapped trails appeared on the screen. "We're almost there, Trevor," I said. "Just a little further." He didn't respond, focused only on putting one foot in front of the other. The scratches on his face and arms looked angry in the beam of my flashlight, which was growing dimmer by the minute. Finally, we emerged onto a trail I recognized, the main northern loop. Relief flooded through me as I checked the GPS again and saw our position clearly marked on the map. We'd somehow found our way back to mapped territory. Trevor collapsed to his knees, his strength finally giving out. I knelt beside him, checking his pulse, rapid but present. His skin felt cold and clammy, classic signs of shock. I pulled out my radio and tried again. This time, instead of static, I heard the blessed sound of the dispatcher's voice. "This is Ranger Brewer," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and professional despite everything. "I've got Ranger Graves with me on the Northern Loop Trail, approximately 2 miles from the trailhead. He's injured and in shock. We need immediate medical assistance." "Copy that, Ranger Brewer," came the reply. Emergency services are being dispatched. Can you provide details on his injuries? Multiple lacerations to face and arms, possible concussion, definite shock, I reported. He's conscious, but disoriented. Understood. Paramedics are en route. Estimated arrival 20 minutes. Can you confirm your exact location? I gave them the GPS coordinates, then set about making Trevor as comfortable as possible. I removed my jacket and placed it over him, elevating his feet using my backpack. Help is coming, I told him, squeezing his shoulder gently. Just hang on. Trevor's eyes found mine for a brief moment of clarity. It's a desolate place, Clifford, he whispered. The forest leads you where it wants you to go. Then his eyes unfocused again, and he went back to staring at nothing. I sat beside him, one hand on his wrist monitoring his pulse, the other clutching the photograph from the ranger station. I wondered what Trevor had seen out there in the dark, what had left those marks on him, and whether it was the same thing that had taken Tammy. I stayed with him like that until I heard the approaching sirens and saw the flashlights of the paramedics coming up the trail. As they took over Trevor's care, loading him onto a stretcher and starting an IV, I stood back and watched, exhaustion finally catching up with me. You coming with us, Ranger? One of the paramedics asked as they prepared to carry Trevor down to the waiting ambulance. I nodded, too tired to speak, and followed them down the trail. Behind us, the forest stood silent and dark, keeping its secrets for another night. I tracked Trevor's condition obsessively after the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance. The emergency room staff at Regional Medical Center worked quickly, cleaning and stitching the deep lacerations that crisscrossed his arms and face. I sat in the waiting room for hours, the photograph from the ranger station burning a hole in my pocket while I replayed the night's events in my mind. Family only, the nurse at the desk kept telling me when I asked for updates. He doesn't have family in the area, I explained for the third time. I'm his colleague. We work together at Blackwood. She softened slightly at that. He's stable. The doctor will be out shortly. When the doctor finally appeared, his assessment was clinical and detached. Ranger Graves is suffering from severe lacerations, exposure, and shock. We're keeping him for observation and further testing. When can I see him? I asked. Tomorrow. He needs rest. Trevor ended up staying at Regional for a full week. His physical wounds required multiple treatments. The cuts were deeper than they initially appeared, with several needing additional stitches after the first round of suturing didn't hold. The psychological damage seemed even more severe. The nurses told me he woke screaming during the first few nights, thrashing so violently they had to restrain him. When I was finally allowed to visit, I found Trevor propped up in the hospital bed, staring out the window. The scratches on his face had formed angry red lines that stood out against his dark skin. "Hey," I said, pulling up a chair beside him. Trevor turned slowly, his eyes taking a moment to focus on me. "Clifford, how are you feeling?" Like I got dragged through hell. His voice was raspy, as if he'd been screaming for hours. "They say I'm lucky." I leaned forward. "Trevor, what happened out there? What did you see after we lost radio contact?" He frowned, his forehead creasing with effort. "I remember answering your call. You said you found a lost hiker. I was heading out to meet you and then..." He shook his head. "Nothing. Just waking up here." "You don't remember screaming on the radio? Or what attacked you?" "Attacked me?" Trevor looked down at his bandaged arms as if seeing them for the first time. "The doctor said I must have fallen somewhere. Hit my head." I pulled my chair closer. "Trevor, something happened to you out there. You were saying things when I found you, about the forest leading people where it wants them to go." His eyes widened momentarily, then clouded with confusion. "I don't remember any of that. The doctor later told me this was common with traumatic events. The mind protects itself," he explained during one of my visits. "Between the possible concussion and exposure, memory loss isn't unexpected." But I knew better. Something had happened to Trevor in those woods, something that had left him physically and mentally scarred. The same something that had created an impossible ranger station and made a woman named Tammy Fitzgerald vanish without a trace. The incident consumed my thoughts in the weeks that followed. I couldn't focus on my regular duties. Every patrol, every routine task became background noise to my growing obsession with uncovering the truth. I kept the photograph of Amelia Dennis in my locker, taking it out whenever I was alone to study her face and the ominous message scrawled on the back. I started with the park's employee records, searching for any mention of Amelia. The digital archives went back 10 years, but her name appeared in only a handful of documents. Basic employment records showing she'd worked at Blackwood for 3 years before her death, and a brief mention in a staff newsletter welcoming new rangers. The park's memorial wall provided another clue, a small brass plaque listing her name and dates of service, along with a simple epitaph, "Lost to the wilderness she loved." No details about how she died. I expanded my search to local newspapers, spending my days off at the county library scrolling through microfiche archives. Finally, I found what I was looking for, a small article dated 7 years ago about a tragic accident at Blackwood National Park. According to the official report, Amelia Dennis had been hiking alone on her day off when she fell from a cliff face on the northern boundary. Her body was recovered 2 days later by a search team. The article quoted then Assistant Chief Ranger Mickey Estrada, calling it a devastating loss to the Blackwood family. But as I dug deeper, troubling inconsistencies emerged. The accident report mentioned Amelia hiking in an area that was closed for maintenance that month. Weather records showed heavy rainfall the day she supposedly went hiking, making a recreational climb unlikely for an experienced ranger. Most disturbing was what I found in the back issues of the staff newsletter. 3 weeks before her death, Amelia had received a commendation for diligence in documenting unexplained phenomena in the northern section, the same area where I'd found Tammy. I brought my findings to Zachary first, catching him alone in the equipment shed where he'd warned me years earlier. "I need to ask you about Amelia Dennis," I said without preamble. Zachary froze, then slowly put down the radio he'd been checking. "Where did you hear that name?" I showed him the photograph. His face went pale. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "In a ranger station that shouldn't exist, the night Trevor got hurt." Zachary handed the photograph back like it might burn him. "You need to let this go, Clifford, for your own good." "What happened to her, Zach? What's out there in the northern section?" He shook his head. "Talk to Mickey if you want to know more. But my advice, drop it." Chief Ranger Mickey Estrada was less subtle. When I requested permission to organize a search for the mysterious ranger station, he denied it immediately. "We don't have resources for wild goose chases," he said from behind his immaculate desk. "Especially not based on hallucinations experienced during a high-stress rescue." "It wasn't a hallucination," I insisted. "And what about Amelia Dennis? She was documenting something in that same area before she died." Mickey's face hardened. Ranger Dennis died in a tragic accident while hiking off duty. End of story. The accident report doesn't add up. She was supposedly in a closed area during bad weather. That's enough. Mickey stood up, his stocky frame imposing despite his average height. "You're overstepping, Brewer. Whatever you think you found out there, it wasn't real. Trevor got lost and injured himself. You found him and brought him back. That's all that happened." But I couldn't let it go. I filed formal requests to access Amelia's complete personnel file and the full investigation into her death. I asked to review the search and rescue logs from the night Trevor was injured. Each request was denied or returned with heavily redacted documents. I began asking other rangers about Amelia, but most of the current staff hadn't worked at Blackwood when she died. Those who had changed the subject or claimed not to remember much about her. 2 weeks after Trevor returned to light duty, I cornered Mickey again after a staff meeting. "I need to talk to you about what happened that night," I said as the other rangers filed out. Mickey's gray eyes were cold behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "We've been through this." "No, we haven't. Something happened to Trevor out there. Something happened to Amelia Dennis in the same area, and the administration is covering it up." "Careful, Brewer." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You're making accusations without evidence." "I have evidence." I pulled out copies of the weather reports, the maintenance schedules, and the newsletter mentioning Amelia's commendation. She was investigating something in the northern section before she died, the same place where I found a woman who vanished without a trace, and where Trevor was attacked by something he can't, or won't, remember. Mickey looked at my documents without touching them. "You know what I see? I see a ranger who's becoming obsessed with conspiracy theories. A ranger who might need psychological counseling before he can continue field duties." The threat was clear. "Are you saying I'm imagining things?" I asked. "I'm saying that stress affects people differently. Trevor experienced physical trauma and exposure. You experience the stress of a night rescue gone wrong. It's natural to try to make sense of chaotic events." His tone was patronizing, as if explaining something to a child. "But pursuing these theories isn't healthy for you or helpful to the park." "So I should just forget what I saw? Pretend it never happened?" Mickey straightened his already perfect uniform. "I'm advising you, as your superior officer, to focus on your assigned duties and leave the past in the past. If you can't do that, I'll have to note concerns about your fitness for duty in your next evaluation." He walked away, leaving me standing alone in the meeting room with my useless evidence and unanswered questions. That night, I returned to my small ranger cabin and spread everything I'd gathered across my kitchen table. The newspaper articles, the redacted reports, the photograph of Amelia Dennis. The message on the back seemed to mock me. The forest takes what it wants. It had taken Amelia. It had tried to take Trevor. And whatever was happening at Blackwood, the administration was determined to keep it buried. I got the transfer orders on a Tuesday, a thin envelope with the Cedar Ridge State Park logo waiting in my mailbox, the kind of thing administration leaves when they don't want to face you directly. 3 months had passed since finding Tammy by the creek, since Trevor's screams over the radio, since the impossible ranger station with its blood-stained floors, and the photograph that now lived in my desk drawer. I read the letter twice, standing in the small kitchenette of my ranger cabin. Budget constraints. Staffing needs. Effective 2 weeks from today. The language was bureaucratic and final. The signature at the bottom belonging to Mickey Estrada, who hadn't spoken more than 10 words to me since our confrontation about Amelia Dennis. The phone rang 3 times before Mickey picked up. "Ranger Station, Estrada speaking." "It's Brewer. I just got transfer papers to Cedar Ridge." A pause, then Mickey's voice, carefully neutral. "Yes, that's correct. I didn't request a transfer." "Nobody said you did. This is an administrative decision based on departmental needs." I leaned against the counter, gripping the phone tighter. "This is about my investigation, isn't it?" "There is no investigation, Brewer. There never was. You experienced a stressful night rescue. Your colleague was injured in an accident, and you've been fixating on conspiracy theories ever since. If anything, this transfer is a fresh start. I'd take it as a favor. A favor would be telling me the truth about what happened to Amelia Dennis." The line went quiet for so long, I thought he'd hung up. "Pack your things, Brewer. Your last day is the 26th. Cedar Ridge is expecting you the following Monday." The line went dead. I spent the next 2 weeks doing my regular patrols, avoiding the northern section where I'd found Tammy. The other rangers treated me like I had something contagious. Even Zachary stayed clear, though I caught him watching me sometimes with an expression that looked almost like pity. On my last day, I arrived at the station early. The administration building was empty, computer terminals dark except for the soft glow of screensavers. I sat at the records terminal and logged in, navigating to the incident reports from that night. Nothing. I checked the date range again, expanding it to the entire week. There should have been my initial report about finding a lost hiker, the medical response for Trevor, the search parameters, but the system showed no incidents on that date. I tried the medical logs next. Trevor had been out for a week recovering. There should be paperwork, duty reassignments, medical leave documentation. Nothing. My hands felt cold as I searched for any mention of my radio calls that night. According to the system, I hadn't made any transmissions during my entire shift. The call log was blank for my radio ID. I sat back in the chair, the reality sinking in. They hadn't just blocked my investigation, they'd erased it. As far as Blackwood's records were concerned, nothing had happened that night. I glanced at the clock, 20 minutes before the morning shift arrived. Working quickly, I searched for Dennis Emilia in the personnel archives. The search returned only basic employment records, hire date, position, end of service. I copied everything to a flash drive, then searched the digital archives of staff newsletters. There were only 2 mentions of her, a welcome announcement and the brief commendation I'd already found about documenting unexplained phenomena. I copied those too, then pulled up the park's mapping system. The northern section where I'd found Tammy showed normal trails and terrain features, nothing unusual. I took screenshots anyway, marking the approximate location where I'd encountered her and where the impossible ranger station had appeared. Footsteps in the hallway made me quickly close the programs and pocket the flash drive. I logged out just as the door opened and Mickey walked in, stopping when he saw me. "Brewer, you're in early." "Just clearing out my locker," I said, standing up. He watched me for a moment, eyes dropping to the computer I'd just used. "Everything squared away for your departure?" "Almost. Just need to turn in my radio and keys." "Good. Cedar Ridge is a nice park. Smaller than Blackwood, but the trails are well maintained. You'll do fine there." I nodded, moving toward the door. "One question before I go." Mickey's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened slightly. "What happens to rangers who investigate the sounds at night? The ones who don't follow Zachary's warning?" His face remained carefully blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Amelia Dennis was documenting something in the northern section. The same place where Tammy appeared. The same place where Trevor got attacked by something that left him repeating that the forest leads people where it wants them to go." Mickey stepped closer, lowering his voice even though we were alone. "Listen carefully. You had a difficult experience during a night rescue. Trevor had an accident. Everything else is stress and an overactive imagination. Take this transfer as the gift it is, Brewer. Some rangers never get the chance to leave." The threat wasn't subtle. I held his gaze for a moment, then walked past him toward the locker room. An hour later, I stood beside my truck in the staff parking lot, the last box of belongings secured in the back. The photograph of Amelia Dennis was wrapped in a shirt at the bottom of my duffel bag, along with the flash drive of copied files. I'd taken one last walk around the station, turning in my keys and radio to a clerk who barely looked at me. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, looking at Blackwood's ranger station in the rearview mirror. The questions still burned in my mind. What had happened to Tammy? What had attacked Trevor? What had Amelia Dennis discovered in the northern section that had gotten her killed? And why was the administration so determined to cover it all up? The answers weren't here. Not anymore. But I had names, dates, and files. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from Blackwood National Park, the photograph in my memories the only evidence that anything had happened at all. I settled into my new position at Cedar Ridge, but the memories from Blackwood clung to me like a persistent shadow. The routine was different here. Smaller park, fewer visitors, more maintenance duties. Yet I found myself scanning the tree line during night patrols, listening for sounds that didn't belong. The rational part of my brain knew I was safe now, hundreds of miles from whatever haunted the northern section of Blackwood. But that didn't stop my hand from drifting to my radio at every unexpected noise. My new colleagues seemed nice enough. They invited me to weekly poker games and asked normal questions about my transfer. I gave them the sanitized version, budget cuts, staffing needs, and they accepted it without pressing further. Cedar Ridge didn't have the same atmosphere of secrets and unspoken rules that permeated Blackwood. No one pulled me aside to warn me about investigating strange sounds. No areas of the park were subtly off limits. But during quiet moments in my cabin, I spread my collected evidence across the kitchen table and stared at the photograph of Amelia Dennis. Her eyes looked back at me from beneath the regulation cap, bright and determined. The message scrawled on the back: "The forest takes what it wants. Amelia Dennis never left. Neither will you." Seemed less threatening now that I had physically left Blackwood, but no less disturbing. I often found myself questioning if Tammy Fitzgerald had ever existed at all. Had I imagined her sitting by Willow Creek that night? Her vague answers about her friends? Her unnaturally cold skin despite the warm night? The way she vanished without leaving a single footprint? It all seemed more like a hallucination than reality. But if I had imagined her, what about Trevor? His injuries were real enough. The impossible ranger station with its blood-stained walls had felt solid beneath my feet. The flash drive with my copied files became my most valued possession. I reviewed its contents almost nightly, searching for patterns or clues I might have overlooked. The employment records were frustratingly sparse. Just basic information about Amelia's hire date and position. The newsletter mentions were equally unhelpful, though the commendation about documenting unexplained phenomena in the northern section continued to nag at me. What had she been documenting? And why had all records of her work disappeared? 3 weeks into my new position, I started researching other strange disappearances in national parks across the country. The internet was full of conspiracy theories and unsubstantiated claims, but beneath the noise, I found disturbing similarities to my own experience. People vanishing without a trace in areas they knew well. Search parties finding no evidence despite extensive efforts. Witnesses describing unusual silence in the forest just before disappearances. Rangers and park employees who refused to discuss certain incidents or areas. I created a spreadsheet tracking the cases that seemed most credible, noting locations, dates, weather conditions, and witness accounts. The pattern wasn't immediately obvious, but it was there. A higher concentration of unexplained disappearances in older parks with large wilderness sections, particularly those with a history of indigenous warnings about certain areas. Blackwood fit that profile perfectly. I tried contacting Trevor twice. The first time he didn't pick up. The second time he answered but hung up as soon as I identified myself. I couldn't blame him. Whatever had happened to him in the forest that night had left both physical and psychological scars. Maybe forgetting was his way of coping. My 4th week at Cedar Ridge, I was assigned to night patrol along the eastern boundary. The moon was nearly full, just like the night I'd heard Tammy calling for help. The similarity made me uneasy, but I reminded myself that Cedar Ridge was different. Nothing unusual had happened here, at least not according to any records I could find. I was checking a campsite that had been reported abandoned when I heard it, a scream echoing through the trees. Not an animal sound, not the wind. A human scream, high and terrified, coming from somewhere to the north. My first instinct was to run toward it just as I had at Blackwood, but something stopped me. The memory of Trevor's voice cutting out over the radio, the blood-stained walls of the impossible ranger station, Zachary's warning about rangers who investigated night sounds and never came back. I unclipped my radio and called dispatch. "This is Ranger Brewer on the eastern boundary. I just heard what sounds like a human scream approximately half a mile north of my position, requesting backup before investigation." The dispatcher responded immediately. Copy that, Brewer. Stay at your current location. Rangers Peterson and Alvarez are 20 minutes out. Do not approach alone. Repeat, do not approach alone. Understood. Holding position and awaiting backup. I clipped the radio back to my belt, then unholstered my flashlight and swept the beam across the trees. Nothing moved in the darkness. The scream came again, more desperate this time. Every instinct told me to help, to run toward the sound. But I remembered Tammy's ice-cold skin, Trevor's bloodied face, the photograph with its ominous warning. I stayed put, counting the minutes until headlights appeared on the access road. Rangers Peterson and Alvarez pulled up in a park vehicle, both looking alert but not particularly concerned. This was probably routine for them, investigating strange sounds that usually turned out to be mountain lions or drunk campers. Heard it twice, I told them as they approached. Female voice. Sounds like she's in trouble. Coming from that direction. I pointed north. Peterson nodded. Let's check it out. Stay together. Standard formation. We moved through the forest as a unit, calling out periodically to identify ourselves as park rangers. No response came except the normal sounds of the night forest, insects, small animals moving through undergrowth, the occasional distant owl call. The forest here wasn't unnaturally silent like Blackwood had been that night. After 45 minutes of methodical searching, we found nothing. No lost hikers, no signs of disturbance, no footprints other than our own. Peterson called it in, and we were ordered back to our regular patrols. Probably a mountain lion? Alvarez suggested as we walked back. They can sound eerily human sometimes. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I knew what I'd heard, and it wasn't a mountain lion. But I also knew better than to push the issue. When morning came, I joined a more extensive search team that combed the area thoroughly. 8 rangers spread out in a grid pattern, checking every ravine and thicket. We found nothing unusual, no abandoned equipment, no signs of struggle, no evidence anyone had been in distress. As we regrouped at the vehicles, Chief Ranger Wilson clapped me on the shoulder. Good call radioing it in, Brewer. Always better to check and find nothing than ignore something and miss someone who needs help. I nodded, thinking of Zachary's warning back at Blackwood. For the first time, I truly understood the wisdom in it. Not because there was nothing to investigate. I was more convinced than ever that something strange was happening in our national parks, but because whatever it wasn't something a lone ranger with a flashlight should face. I had survived whatever lurked in Blackwood's depths, but the experience had changed me. I carried the knowledge now, heavy as stone. Some mysteries were better left unsolved, at least not alone. The forest took what it wanted, but it hadn't taken me. Not yet. That night, I added Cedar Ridge to my spreadsheet of incidents, noting the date, location, and lack of physical evidence. Then I opened my drawer and looked once more at Amelia Dennis's photograph before carefully returning it to its hiding place. I wouldn't forget her, or Tammy, or what happened at Blackwood. But I would be smarter now about how I searched for answers.